Okay, so this is my friend Jansen, who lives in Los Angeles. And Jansen and I are text message buddies, so we're constantly texting each other, basically trying to make each other laugh. And we get into these sessions, and it's like tennis. It's like back and forth, volleying back and forth. And so we were doing this one day, and we hit a point in the text message conversation where something changed, and it was, it may have been that one person had to take a phone call. It could have been that one person was trying to make the other laugh, and it just didn't quite land right. Something was happening. So my friend sent me this message, which he was trying to describe. He's like, you know that feeling you get when someone says something offbeat, in a text message, and it kind of throws off the entire rhythm of the conversation. And so, sometimes all you can do is send an emoji response, right? And he's like, well, we need a good German word for this. There's got to be a word. So of course, I went on my phone, looked on Google, found a list of good German words, and Schadenfreude, Fahrvergnügen, all those words. And I came to the end of the list, and I found this one word, which I'm going to slaughter the pronunciation. Is any German speakers in here who would give this a shot? Thank you. So, I think my friend was hitting on something here. So, Zugzwang.
Zugzwang.
So, that's the pronunciation. So this is German for compulsion to move. So it describes this situation in a chess game where one player must make a move, but there's really no good move that they can make. So they're sort of stuck in this situation where they're like, well, I've got to do something, but anything I do is not gonna work out so well for me. So his example was maybe we just respond with an emoji or an emoticon. So this is the shruggy. I'm sure how many people have seen the shruggy or used the shruggy? Perhaps you use it several times a day because the world calls for that several times a day sometimes. But what he hit on was this idea of, when someone says something offbeat. Now, this is not a high-stakes thing. We're just trying to make each other laugh. And in fact, in the moment when we were kind of stuck, it wasn't that important that it threw things off. But there was a flow going, and there was something happening before this offbeat moment. And we'll call this positivity resonance. So what this means is that, there was something positive happening between the two of us. So where does this word come from? So positivity resonance is a term that was coined by Barbara Fredrickson, who is a professor and researcher at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, so not far from here. And she is the principal investigator in a lab that studies positivity and sort of how that affects our well-being. So she defines positivity resonance when three things are occurring. Two people or more people are sharing one or more positive emotions. Their biochemistry and behaviors are synchronized. And this doesn't just have to happen in person. So this may be happening with my friend in LA. We may be experiencing some of the same biochemical and behavioral things. We're laughing, we're releasing oxytocin. Things are happening at the same time for us. And we're motivated to invest in each other's well-being. So we're doing this, we're having this thing happening between us that we both know will benefit the other person. So in her book, so she has this book out that came out recently called Love 2.0, and she describes love in a way that many of us don't think of love. So we hear love in the fiction that we read, and the songs that we listen to, in the movies we watch especially, that is this description of this long-term romantic relationships or familial relationships. And what she's learning is that by studying bodies and our physical well-being, that love, we should actually think of love more as these micro moments of connection. And so this actually opens up love to more than what we think of it as traditionally. So that means that we could have moments of love with complete strangers, and we can increase the moments of love that we have with the people in our lives. So what's happening during that offbeat moment? So probably anxiety. Now, for my friend and I, it's not huge anxiety, but there is something that changed what was going on. So your brain on anxiety, when your brain is experiencing one of these moments, cortisol production increases, which is the stress hormone, and oxytocin, which is sort of the drug we have in ourselves that is released when we have good experiences, that decreases. And cortisol increases have a tremendous effect on the vagus nerve, which interfaces with our parasympathetic nervous system. And that effect affects inflammation in our bodies. Inflammation in our bodies then makes us more prone to certain types of disease if we have, prolonged periods of that inflammation. So these kinds of experiences are increasing the number of positive experiences, can have a really profound impact on our well-being. Conversely, having tons of moments of anxiety and cortisol production really can adversely affect our well-being. So what are the other ways in which we experience anxiety, especially with the tools we're using and the software we're using, the apps we're using? Read receipts, right? So emails, text messages, messages in Facebook, messages in other apps like dating apps and things like that. So, you get some information, either that you don't see a read receipt, so it's like, well, why aren't they reading the message I sent them? Are they ignoring me? Or were they in an accident? Like, what's going on? Like, there's these gaps in information. There's something called the typing awareness indicator. Does everyone know what that is? So the 3 dots, right? So if you think about something like iMessage, and there was an article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago that talked about this very thing. Bubbles carry a lot of weight. Texting anxiety caused by these little bubbles. So this writer, Jessica Bennett, describes how her therapist ordered her to disable this indicator on her phone because it was causing her too much anxiety. We also have anxiety from what I'm going to call the everything is awesome syndrome. So, the song, the Tegan and Sarah song from the Lego movie. People post things on Facebook, Instagram, wherever, whether it's photos, posts, videos, etc. And often they're trying to tell the story of their lives, the great parts about their lives. They're either doing it because they just want to express it, they want to get it out there, they want you to feel good and lift your spirits. Generally, most people have good reasons for doing it. But there are gaps in that information. And there's an article in The Atlantic a long time ago, about a year ago, is Facebook making us lonely? Like, are there certain people who are prone to depression, who are prone to loneliness, for whom when they see these things, they fill in the gaps, and they don't necessarily fill in the gaps with the story of the ups and downs that all of us experience, the light and the dark of our lives. They're only seeing the positive. There was also a study recently that said, someone posting lots of pictures of their partner, their new boyfriend, their girlfriend, their husband, their wife, etc., that for some people, if there's a lot of that, and we all kind of know when it kind of goes beyond that limit, that it may indicate some self-esteem issues in the person who's posting it. But we're all like, but I post pictures, in the past I've posted pictures, do I have self-esteem issues? Like, what's going on? So there are different ways of looking at this. Here's an app. It's an app called Secret. Some of you may be aware of it. It's gotten a lot of bad press, kind of the mean girl app for some people. So we need an app where we can go express the truth of what we're feeling. And I can't imagine that the person who posted this was having a lot of oxytocin being produced when they were writing this or when they were thinking about it, right? And the other person hates sleeping alone. So there's so much good, right? We have so much data, either that we're producing data by taking photos, by writing things, or we're measuring data on ourselves. We're quantifying ourselves. We are biohacking. And these data produce opportunities for action, right? So we have all these opportunities. We have buttons, we have swipes, we have things to do that can be opportunities for action for good and bad or in between. But there's a lot of risks too, right? So we've got data, we have gaps in data, we have opportunities for action, we also have a lot of opportunities for anxiety, or opportunities for inaction, right? I give up, this is the nihilism. So this is a conference for designers and developers and the people who love them, right? So what can we do to help, right? So I believe that we should design and make things to help save us from ourselves. And so, the libertarians among you will be like, well, this is a nanny state kind of thing, like whatever. So I don't mean that we should force people to do anything, but what I mean is that we are building products traditionally to help people satisfy certain goals, certain needs. They're in certain situations. We have design techniques and a design process, many different ways of helping people achieve their goals. But are we really helping people save themselves from themselves? So how do we typically save ourselves from ourselves? We seek and follow good advice, right? Or maybe we don't know we need it, and someone kind in our lives, whether that's a mentor or a friend or a family member or the smart uncle, the wise uncle, whatever, they give us good advice, and they typically give it to us when they see that we need it the most. So what I'm proposing is that we should understand the best advice on the subject matter of the problems we're trying to solve. So let me clarify. I don't mean the best design advice. Of course we need to follow the best design advice. There are a lot of talks at this conference and other conferences and publications and books and things about good design advice. So of course we need to follow that. And not just design principles. So design principles are a really effective way for an organization or for a company to express what they believe in and how those beliefs and those values express themselves in the designs. What I'm talking about is the best advice for the human. So let's look at the traditional kinds of design principles. So at Facebook, they want to make sure their designs are universal, human, clean, consistent, useful, fast, and transparent. And they have a paragraph or two or whatever for each of these items that really describe what that means. So that's all extremely helpful, and you can see that expressed in their products. So Google recently released the material design principles. We challenged ourselves to create a visual language for our users that synthesizes the classic principles of good design with the innovation and possibility of technology and science, which means material is the metaphor, it's bold, graphic, intentional, and motion provides meaning. So they're really, really thinking about how the interaction and the micro-interactions affect the overall design. So with this new approach and it's not really new, I think people are generally doing this, but I'm talking about really bringing it to the forefront of the process. Can we improve the products we use every day, especially the ones where we always lament what's going on with them? Like I said, all these articles in these really good magazines and things like the New York Times talking about our collective anxiety, about the anxiety we're experiencing. Can we discover ideas for new features of the products we have? And can we come up with whole new products based on this way of thinking? So how many of you have seen the movie Her? A lot of you, okay. So if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Some of my friends hated it. Some people loved it. The screenplay is wonderful. The acting's great. Joaquin Phoenix is the main character, along with a voice of an OS or an operating system voiced by Scarlett Johansson. This was directed by Spike Jonze. I wrote an article about this movie. It had such a profound impact on me for Print Magazine, the online version, not long after the film came out. And so what we see in this film is we see a guy who had separated from his wife. He's in a future time, so this is sort of science fiction. And he installs an operating system that begins talking to him and interacting with him. It sounds, it's sort of like Siri, but sort of an artificial intelligence version of Siri that is able to have emotion and express emotion and interact with them. So he starts experiencing this positivity resonance with this operating system. And so going back to Barbara Fredrickson, the researcher at UNC, she mentions in her book studies where they've looked at positivity resonance happening between people, one person hearing someone telling a story, a pre-recorded version, and they've measured the brain activity of the person telling the story at some point in the past and the person listening to it now, and that same kind of resonance is happening even though it's not happening in real time. So it's realistic that an operating system and its interactions with you could create positivity resonance. So that part of the film actually is fairly real. Some other parts and the kind of relationship they develop, maybe not so much. But the rest of this movie has all these interesting interactions where people aren't staring into their smartphones, and with the latest Apple Watch announcement, that kind of thing also, where we're not necessarily dealing with the issues of sort of not connecting with people, not being face to face with people. Like those things are coming, and those things are expressed in the film very well. But the problem I had with the film and the gut feeling, it wasn't really about the film, but it was the emotion that I had when I saw the film was just like, we're manufacturing so much of the dramas of our relationships. And the fact that a machine, an OS, an artificial intelligence thing, can also manufacture those relationships just tells me more and more that our brains can manufacture those same types of situations. So this movie is about love, a man in love with his OS. I'm thinking about this good advice method, this way of designing. Well, how would we apply this to designing for love? So first of all, what is love? So let's go back to the researcher, Barbara Fredrickson. So the love you crave lies within momentary experiences of connection. And this ties you in, and what's key here is that your body and your brain, so the impact on your health is what's really important here. It connects you to the social fabric, to those in your midst, so it doesn't just have to be the people you tell the story of being in love with. It really can be anyone, so the opportunity is huge. So who do we turn to, right? So who has the best advice on love? You know, artists and writers, but sometimes they write really sappy songs that are kind of depressing, and maybe they don't, but some of them do. Psychoanalysts, advice columnists, there are some great folks out there who we all read and enjoy listening to their podcasts, wise relatives and friends, but the neuroscientists, we really should be looking at the neuroscientists. Technologists, I crossed this off, but I don't believe that's true, but I'm saying I think we can get better at this. So writers on love. So this is a quote from Iris Murdoch. Love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. So this is sort of necessary to create positivity resonance, is to recognize that and to see that in all the people that are out there in the world. So what are the products that are affecting our lives with love? So what products would this apply to? So we have social networks, we have apps and websites that help me find dates, OkCupid, Match.com, things like that, Tinder. We have financial and accounting software, right? So I'm not just talking about things like social media and like dating apps. I'm really talking about anything. The financial and accounting software you use may help you care for your family over time, right? And plan for your retirement, things like that. Communication tools, email, text message, et cetera, and increasingly wearables and devices in the Internet of Things. So, some of the current Android watches as well as the Apple Watch that's coming, the idea of the haptic experience of feeling the heartbeat of someone else, right? So that's positivity resonance, a very real version of that. You could also be talking with them on the phone, a call with them, et cetera, at the same time. So let's start looking at the good advice. So this is one of the best pieces of advice I think I've ever heard on love. And the idea is, do not create fiction to fill gaps in information. So we all sometimes think about others' motivations. Why isn't that person texting me back right away? What's going on? How are they feeling? What are they thinking? What's my boss thinking? So we create these stories of what's happening. And what we see about another's motivation or intention is not always accurate. Doesn't mean we need to be naive, right? But certainly we need to stop telling ourselves stories. So we've seen some folks start to do this. This is an upgrade to iOS in the last version, I think, that it lets you, okay, you didn't answer a call, well, it gives you the opportunity to fill the gaps of information with why you didn't answer. So the person, you're relieving some of that anxiety from the person on the other end. Or maybe you're creating more anxiety. So again, these tools can be used in different ways. Anyone recognize this? This is fairly new in Facebook, right? So it's like you're interested in someone, or you have a friend who, did they break up with that person or not? Did they get divorced? Like, I haven't seen them since high school, whatever. So maybe you're just interested. So you go here and it's like, okay, well, ask them. Okay, well, all right, so how many people have used this? And everyone can close their eyes and we can just raise your hand. So what happens when you click this button? So I haven't clicked this button because honestly I'm a little scared. I have anxiety about what's going to happen when I click this button. I don't know. The possibilities are that there's going to be a modal or something that allows me to write a message to them and craft the way I want to ask them. Could be that they've listed their relationship status and it's automatically going to give it to me, or it could be that it just sends them an automated message and then they are able to reply on whatever they want. I don't know. Does anyone know how this actually works? Is it everyone is afraid to, how it works? Okay. Okay. I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying that the motivation is there to relieve a gap in information, right? To relieve anxiety. But just the question of if we thought about the good advice about this, maybe it would help change the way we might design it. Another piece of good advice, still the mind. So I've studied Iyengar Yoga for the last over 15 years, and this is something I keep coming back to, where there's the physical practice, but ultimately everything is about stilling the mind. And Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras wrote, and I'm gonna slaughter the Sanskrit here too, so I'm not gonna even try to say it, but this means the stilling of the turnings of the mind or the modifications of the mind. So what this means, and they talk about how how the source of all human suffering are the turnings of the mind. And I don't just mean like bad memories or anxiety or bad thoughts. This could be good memories. It's anything that keeps us from being in the moment, and anything that keeps us from being in the moment ultimately keeps us from connecting and having these in the moment, momentary of experiences of positivity resonance. So I recently received this device. I pre-ordered it. This is the Interaxon Muse. I actually have it right here. So this is a headband that you put on your head, and it measures your brainwaves. It looks kind of dorky, so they want people to start walking around, and going to the coffee shop with this on. It's Google Glass-like in that way. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen. Some people may do it. Maybe everyone will start doing it at some point. They only have one app right now. They're carefully controlling how this works, but the possibilities are endless, and I actually am interested in this. So you could use it for meditation, you could use it for learning, you could use it to control games, perhaps, sort of mind control of games. My interest was using it for something called Yoga Nidra, which is a practice of deep conscious relaxation. So you're awake, but you're relaxing your body, which has numerous health benefits. But the waves your brain are in that your brain is in during Yoga Nidra, it's a combination of delta and theta waves, which is very different than even meditation or wakefulness or REM sleep or deep sleep. So we have the potential to build apps and to do things with devices like this to help with our overall well-being and especially stilling the mind. So gaming. So I read an article recently in Wired, I don't know if any of you saw this, where this guy was talking about using Oculus Rift while playing Alien Isolation. And what he found was that it wasn't just, hey, cool, this is virtual reality, this is awesome. It was like, oh my God, I am so scared because I can peer around and actually feel like I am in that experience. And he said other testers were like ripped it off and ran out of the room screaming. So if games and the devices we use to play those games, maybe could they produce PTSD, right? So maybe we're going to need to start developing and designing solutions where maybe we need brain training using techniques that we know are work for things like healing PTSD. Maybe you have to sort of power your use of the game by doing exercises like this with a device like this. Another piece of good advice, and this comes from a psychologist, a psychoanalyst in Maryland named Gordon Livingston. He was a close friend of Elizabeth Edwards. He's written several books. They all have kind of self-helpy sounding titles. They are self-help. He wrote one called Too Soon Old, Too Late Fast, which is really good. But he wrote another book called How to Love. And you'd think this is like, oh, this is how you need to be and the type of person you need to be and to attract and all these kinds of things. But the first half of the book is who you should avoid. And, who is worthy of our trust, recognize those who are worthy, and steer clear of those who aren't, who are going to waste our time, who are going to break our hearts and spirits. So he goes through and enumerates almost every personality disorder you can think of. And it's a little rough because you can think, well, oh my God, I've dated this person. And you start seeing these patterns. But you also, as you're reading it, you're trying to like, well, I've done things like that in the past. Am I narcissistic? Am I, am I a sociopath? Probably not. But, I think that we have the reality of the people in our lives. And sure, there are certain people we should avoid. But we also need to recognize that there are people in our lives who have some of these issues and have personality disorders. And we ourselves have personality disorders or some attributes that are like personality disorders. So I heard this story on NPR. There's going to be a lot of NPR stuff in here, and public radio in general.
It occurred to me a number of years ago that monitoring speech patterns would be a really powerful way to devise some kind of an approach to have the ability to predict when an episode is imminent.
McGinnis says researchers have known for some time that people with bipolar disorder speak differently.
Someone who is depressed speaks very slow, and the individual has a number of pauses, and you're sitting on the edge of your seat, often wanting to drag the words out of their mouth. Whereas in manic speech, it's going so fast that you can almost, and then the person is just going on, they're jumping from one topic to the next and all over the place and here and there, and then it's, and then you see the bird, and then they saw then the bird flirts, and, the turtles, and, and then they're going on and on and on on about all these different things, and you just become exhausted listening to them, and you find that you cannot get a word in edgewise.
McGinnis wondered if he could pick up hints of these altered speech patterns in people being treated for bipolar disorder when they weren't having a full-blown episode, but might be on the verge of one. So he and some computer science colleagues invented a smartphone app. The idea is doctors would give patients the app, and the app would record whenever they made a phone call. Once a day, the phone would send the recorded speech to a computer in the doctor's office, and the computer would analyze it for such qualities as speed, energy, and inflection.
So if we have the potential, and that's listening to someone's voice and the calls they make, but what about the text messages we write or the emails we write? If we could start detecting some of these qualities that may indicate that we're verging towards this pattern, or maybe we should talk to someone or be connected with someone, or someone else in our family should know, those could be really helpful. So Gordon Livingston also writes about, well, whom should we draw close? Those who accept us as we are, give us the benefit of the doubt, care what we think, and assume we will act generously. Does anyone recognize this? So it's a clout score, right? So, there are ways to game this probably, but what if we had a score for sort of how we were doing on other measures of our ability to connect and and how productive we are in our relationships with people? And it doesn't necessarily be something we advertise to everyone, but what if this is feedback to ourselves, a way of quantifying this for ourselves? So this is a message from OkCupid. They have a match percentage, and I'm sure they have some of these qualities in their questions and in their matching, but they ran an experiment where they flipped the percentages, and for people who are highly matched, they told them they weren't very highly matched, and then the opposite. And I'm not going to go into this too much, but it raises some concerns. I feel like they may be confusing, doing A/B testing on a website with things like, psychological research and psychological testing, which isn't quite the same. Another piece of advice, remain open. So some researchers in Europe really looked at the folks that trusted people and had lots of face-to-face interactions. They rated their well-being more highly. So the idea of openness as something that affects your well-being is starting to be noted. So wearables, we have them. We're going to have more of them. What if you had things or the data that all your wearables and all your actions online or on apps was collected, and we were able to get feedback on how open you are or how vulnerable you're being. So here's another thing from the Love 2.0 book, which I highly recommend you read. It's a great resource. She talks about a practice where at the end of every day, you pick your 3 longest social interactions from that day. So I'd love for all of you to do this tonight. So think about the interactions you had. It may be from a conference member you just met, or a coworker that you're here with, or it could be the phone call you had with a loved one or a friend or a family member. And ask the question, how true are these statements? I felt in tune with the person around me, and I felt close to the person. So they did a study. There were some scientists who did a study on this, and what they found, they had 2 groups doing this, and one group was also practicing a form of meditation. And the group that didn't have both groups experienced extremely positive increases in well-being, in the health of their vagus nerve, for instance, which I said, controls or interacts with the parasympathetic nervous system. So, and it wasn't about the qualities of those interactions and whether they were positive or negative. It was just considering them. So just considering your social, these instances can greatly increase your health, probably because over time, you notice more how you interact with people, and it improves the quality of interactions from day to day. So try this tonight, and hopefully every night. I'm certainly going to keep doing it. So another piece of good advice, and this comes from Jason Isbell. Does anyone know who this is? He used to be in the Drive-By Truckers. If you haven't listened to he has an album that came out called Southeastern that is incredible. It's an incredible work of art. It's brilliant. And he was talking with Anna Sale, who has a podcast on WNYC called Death, Sex, and Money. Has anyone heard of that? Also highly recommended. It's a great podcast. It's very new.
How would you describe this first year of marriage that you've had together?
I think we did a great job. We got along for a large part of it, and we don't have the same arguments at the end of the first year that we had at the beginning of the first year, and I think that's important. I think for anything to be successful, your problems have to become different problems over time.
So he's talking about his marriage to Amanda Shires, who's another musician. So your problems have to become different problems over time. Anyone recognize this? So it's the Facebook end-of-year movie. You can actually generate one of these for your entire history of Facebook. What if we had an end-of-the-year review, or even an immediate review, as you're about to write an email or send an email, but certainly at the end of the year, almost like an annual review of how much you've changed in the things. Are you repeating the problems and showing the same behaviors that aren't helpful for you over and over again? Okay, so let's move away from love for a little bit. So we're going to close love for a second. What other aspects of life would benefit from good advice in general? So forget technology for a second. This is a small list. It's really everything, right? Anything you can think of. Play, lifelong learning, educating children, wanderlust, traveling, love of reading, community, entrepreneurship, any of this. And then what other products support these aspects of our lives? So now let's think about the technology. There's another approach to this where you could take a specific product like Facebook or whatever, and it may impact several aspects of life. So love, friendships, how your employer sees you if they look up your Facebook account, all kinds of things. So let's get to the practical part, the really tactical stuff. Like, how does this fit into the design process that I use right now? So maybe you're using Lean UX, maybe you're using Agile, maybe you're using behavioral design techniques. So personas, right? So how many of you are using personas in your work? Okay, so a lot of you. So these are fictional representations of real people, archetypes that you use to really empathize with your users and understand their goals. But let's gain the empathy of someone who would give your users good advice. So I recommend that you envision the person who's the advice giver to the end user of your product. So it's like creating a persona of an advice giver in addition to your personas. Find those real people. So you're going to interview and maybe find the real users of your product. Also find and talk to the people who would give them good advice. And those people may be different for each of your personas. So the best advice giver for one person may be different than the other. So NPR, right? So let's go back to love for a second, right? So not only love of people and interpersonal communication, but people also love NPR, right? So they love the product that I'm working on. I'm also right now working with NPR Music. I'm redesigning their homepage right now as part of our responsive web project. So this is the last part of the overall npr.org universe to be made responsive. So Stephen Thompson from the NPR Music team, he is also one of the co-hosts of a podcast called the Pop Culture Happy Hour with Linda Holmes. And so it just happened that a few days ago, I had already started thinking of this method and writing about this method, and I'm working on NPR Music, and then I hear this. He's talking to Petra Mayer, who's on the NPR Books team, and she's talking about how her musical tastes have not changed since she was in college and when she listened to WHFS, the old station that no longer exists in Washington, D.C. And she talks about how her musical tastes seem to be trapped in amber. Like she saw this playlist where she listens to the churches under the Milky Way tonight, which is a great song, but it's a little old.
In terms of general advice, like this isn't necessarily directed straight at you, but I wrote down just like a few pieces of advice that I wanted to give. And some of this is advice I give to myself. And one of them, the one that kind of comes closest to your concern about your musical taste being cast in amber, is try your damnedest. Do not be one of those people who laments the current state of anything in culture. Don't say like pop music today is terrible. Don't say hip hop music today is terrible, or all hip hop is terrible, or all reggae is terrible. I mean, and I've been guilty of various examples of this, railing against some new technology or some new generation. Try not to do that. Try to check yourself every time that impulse comes up, and find ways to force yourself to engage with the best in something that you don't necessarily automatically grasp.
That makes sense to me.
So we're working on this redesign, and we're wanting to capture these people. We have different personas. We have the person who's really the music lover, the share, the person who wants to really, I called it. They want to maintain their creds. They want cred maintenance. They used to be the person who talked, gave advice about what to listen to all their friends, and they're getting a little older. We have the accidental tourist, the person who isn't a big music lover but may land on a story about music or the music homepage because someone posted something on Facebook. So one of the things that Petra talked about was listening to WHFS and really trusting the voice that was telling her what she should listen to. And so, in this world, and this isn't the real design or what it'll look like, this is an early design exercise, but we're trying to convey, this is a Porter Robinson song. He's an electronic dance music artist. And, some NPR user may not think they like electronic dance music, but, this song features Amy Millan from Stars, so that's more like the indie spectrum. And someone may take the advice of Jason Bentley because they're familiar with him or they're familiar with KCRW, and we give them like a little blurb about what the song is so they can understand like how excited we are about it. So it's not just Spotify and here's some songs you should listen to and you just have to go find them, right? It gives a little bit more guidance and a trusted voice, and that could be Steven's voice or it could be someone from one of these stations. So let's talk about Lean UX, right? So I'm not going to go into depth about Lean UX, and I highly recommend you learn more about that if you don't already or you're not already using it. But we're using it at NPR for our web projects. And the great thing about Lean UX is you really focus on the problem statement first. You really try to understand what you're trying to solve for. What is the current state of the product? What is it not doing well? And then how might we improve the product or introduce features to improve it or change features to improve it? And you create assumptions. So it's a very open process, an open design process where you don't really have arguments because you're just laying out things as assumptions. And one assumption might be counter to another assumption, and that's fine. But you take those assumptions and you manipulate them and try to articulate them and have everyone on the team, developers, designers, product owners, subject matter experts, everyone, bring information to the table. So we could start writing problem statements that talk about how might we help these people follow good advice. And I don't mean deliver them the good advice. I mean build products where they are driven to good advice based on just using the product. Our assumptions can be this piece of good advice is good advice for this persona. And because it's an assumption, we don't have to absolutely be certain that that is good advice yet, right? So the next step, is really developing hypotheses from those assumptions. It's plucking the assumptions that are the most important and perhaps the riskiest and turning those into hypotheses. If we build this feature, then we expect this will happen, and we need to test it to make sure. We need to prototype things and get in front of users with that very soon to test it to make sure that's true. Proto-personas, right? So we talked about this is kind of a prototype version of a persona where you don't have a time or you're really just trying to figure out what kind of research you need to do. Well, proto-personas of these good advice givers, like include that as part of the process. And the experiments, how do we determine whether or not this good advice and the way we've designed to follow this good advice is working? So the goal of this overall is let's get ourselves out of this world of not knowing what to do or not having a good move to make.
Zugzwang.
And let's try to use the shruggy a little less when it comes to our lives of love. Thank you.